The Saints Row reboot was a complete and utter disaster that let down millions of Saints Row fans, and while it was one of the driving factors that led to Volition's demise, we're actually now finding out that a group of former Volition devs have made a brand new video game studio. I have a few things to show off, but before we get into the topic, if you enjoy the content I create, check out the links in the description, follow me on social media, and consider supporting through Patreon or via YouTube memberships. So I wanted to start off with this Shack News article. It says back in 2023, Volition was one of the studios that closed under Embracer's restructuring and layoffs, but several that used to work at Volition may be forming something new. Now, obviously, Embracer has been doing a lot of restructuring, lots of layoffs, but I do think that this game was one of the driving factors that led to Volition's demise. Volition was a company that was well known for 30 years, and it did end up having a massive budget, and I think that when you have such a giant budget and such an epic failure on your hands, yes, it could have led to their demise even if they were not doing lots of restructuring and layoffs, but Embracer saw this failure and went, yeah, we have to cut you guys off. Sorry, just not going to happen again in the future. We are not going to be making another game with you, group. But it says a new studio, Shapeshifter Games, was recently announced, and it's staffed by several veteran developers of the former Volition studios. It says Shapeshifter Games announced its opening with a post from the group's new page. According to the introduction post, Shapeshifter Games will operate as a co-development studio that assists other studios and publishers in the creation of new games. So it's not like they are a Volition themselves where they are going to be making games. They are going to be assisting other studios that need extra developers, a studio that might not think that they can get a project done in a decent amount of time by themselves. And, obviously, I think that the Saints Row reboot was a complete and utter disaster, but this leaves a lot of questions for us to wonder about now until they end up coming out with a product in the next couple of years, because back last year when, of course, a lot of people were talking about the Saints Row reboot and how terribly it ended up going, but according to a few different sources, specifically two YouTubers, Flippy and Mr. Saints Godzilla 21, who were both working on a massive PC patch for Saints Row 2, it was Deep Silver's fault that the Saints Row reboot ended up being a woke nightmare. So now we'll actually see if that's the truth, or those inside sources that they had were just trying to almost defend these developers. No one who worked at Volition, though, ever came out and said if that was or was not true. And you'd think that now that they don't work at Volition, because it's closed and Volition doesn't exist, they'd come out and say it's not the game that we wanted to make, but none of them came out and said that, which honestly, since that started circulating, has always not sat right with me, because I know if my name was being thrown around and everyone was talking about how I ruined a product when I didn't, and I don't work for this company anymore because they're not a company anymore, I know that I personally would come out and say, hey, just to set the record straight, this isn't true. Even if they didn't go into heavy detail, at least somebody coming out and saying that this wasn't the case would have at least been something, but they didn't. All we've got is secondhand rumors from people that might have heard that, but that doesn't mean it's entirely true, because if these developers were being fired over making something they didn't want to make and it was a product they didn't believe in, you'd think that there would be some kind of pushback from somebody. I don't know for sure, but it feels like to me that we got a game that Volition wanted to make, so should we expect any different from Shapeshifter Games? I personally don't think so. It says that this company now, Shapeshifter Games, is indeed staffed by an array of former high-level Volition talent. Matt Madigan is leading things as the studio head. Meanwhile, Volition Games principal producer Rob Lufus is now Shapeshifter's studio director, while former Volition Games franchise creative director Brian Traftican is acting as its creative director. So it's not like they just happen to have a few different developers that are part of this. I mean, we're talking studio heads, we are talking creative directors, we are talking producers, principal producers. So we are talking about people that are now high up at this company, but also were high up at Volition and worked on Saints Row. Now, we obviously don't know if Deep Silver ended up affecting the story or general direction the Saints Row reboot went in, but Volition still came up with the story and the parameters they were given. It was still a woke, cringeworthy nightmare with awful characters and a terrible general story. Plus, on top of all of that, it was a bad game at its core. They had to fix 500 bugs and glitches at launch because of how broken it was. The gameplay was lackluster. It ran poorly, and these are all things Volition did. Those are all their fault. So even if Deep Silver did meddle, the developers at Volition were not blame-free in the disaster it became. And while we don't know every person that is joining shape-shifting games, we don't know exactly what their plans are for the future, and the people that are already hired, the people who started this new company, these higher-ups, were the ones making decisions with the Saints Row reboot and the direction the franchise went in, so they shouldn't be trusted. We don't know exactly what their co-development plans are, and they might be a group other studios can outsource to if they need help finishing a game. They might go 50-50 from the start and have a say in the creative direction a title goes in, or they could turn into a SweetBabyInc where they end up consulting and developing those ideas they recommended to studios, which would be a nightmare. But we are talking about a group of woke individuals who made a woke game that killed a franchise. Unfortunately, they just did not give consumers what we wanted. They could have tried to bring back some of the original Saints and blended in these new characters, but that's not what they did. They took upbeat and edgy and turned it into a bland, unsellable product that killed an entire franchise. And yes, the reboot wasn't the only thing that killed Volition, as a $2 billion deal between Savvy Group and Embracer fell through, but if this title was massively successful, they wouldn't have had a reason to be shut down, and I think Embracer would have went, okay, well, we'll give them some more money for more DLC or another product, even if it's not going to be the $100 million budget that the Saints Row reboot had. It is unfortunate because Saints Row was such a well-known name in the industry, and so was Volition, but unfortunately, what they ended up creating was just a mediocre hunk of junk, to be honest. I mean, even look at the Metacritic scores for this game, a 61 critic, so even the critics did not like it, and a measly 3.1 user score. Ever since launch, this game has been an absolute laugh fest. I personally have seen very few people actually praise what this group of individuals actually ended up creating, but it will be interesting to see if going forward Shapeshifter Games helps make really good products. If they end up creating woke trash like the Saints Row reboot was, only time will tell. I'm sure it'll be quite a few years until we actually get some substance out of them, but it will definitely be something I will be keeping my eye on. But that's all that I really had to discuss in this video. Let everyone know your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed this and of course found it important and informative, make sure to give it a like, share it, and subscribe to the channel. And of course, if you didn't, make sure to give it a dislike. I appreciate your support either way, but I will talk to you all again in the next video really soon.